Your collection of coins is more than just a handful of old change found in a drawer or inherited from a relative. It is, in a very real sense, a small window into more than 3 decades of British history, captured in metal, dates, and the changing face of a single monarch, spanning from the year 1971 all the way to 2002. These 6 coins quietly trace the reign of Queen Elizabeth II through some of the most significant transitions in modern British coinage. And when you look closely at each one, you begin to realize that even something as ordinary as pocket change can carry an extraordinary amount of history within it. The story begins with the oldest coin in your set, dated 1971. This year was not chosen by coincidence in terms of significance. 1971 was the year Britain underwent one of the most dramatic changes in its financial history, known as Decimal Day. Before this year, British currency was famously complicated, based on an old system of pounds, shillings, and pence, where 12 pence made a shilling and 20 shillings made a pound. It was a system inherited from centuries past, difficult for outsiders to understand, and increasingly impractical in a modern, fast-moving economy. On the 15th of February 1971, Britain officially abandoned this old structure and adopted a decimal system, where 1 pound was simply divided into 100 pence, just as most of the world's currencies were structured. This transition required an enormous reminting effort, with millions of brand new coins being produced to replace the old denominations, and your 1971 coin is a direct product of that historic monetary reform. It carries upon it the very first coin portrait of Queen Elizabeth II used after decimalization, a design created by the sculptor Arnold Machin. This portrait shows the Queen wearing a delicate tiara, her head turned to the right in the traditional profile view used on British coinage, and it remained in continuous use from 1968 all the way through
1984. In 1971,
the Queen herself was 45 years old, already nearly 2 decades into her reign, having ascended to the throne in 1952 following the death of her father, King George VI. This coin, then, is not simply an old piece of metal. It is a physical artifact from the very beginning of modern British currency as we know it today. And this single coin represents a fascinating middle chapter in the story. By 1988, 17 years had passed since decimalization, and Britain's coinage had evolved once again. The portrait of the Queen had changed for the 2nd time in her reign, replaced by a new design created by the artist and sculptor Raphael Maklouf. This second portrait, used officially from 1985 through 1997, offered a noticeably different interpretation of the monarch's image compared to the earlier Machin design. Maklouf's version presented the Queen with a more refined, elegant, and somewhat idealized appearance, with more detailed rendering of her hair, jewelry, and the ornate crown she wears in the design. Some numismatists and coin historians have noted over the years that this particular portrait was seen as slightly more youthful and polished than a strictly realistic depiction might have been, reflecting a deliberate, artistic choice to present the monarchy in a dignified and timeless manner rather than emphasizing the natural effects of aging. By the time this 1988 coin was struck, Queen Elizabeth II was 62 years old, well into the middle decades of her long reign, having already witnessed enormous changes in British society, technology, and global politics since she first took the throne in the early 1950s. Holding this coin, you are essentially holding a small piece of the late 1980s, an era of significant cultural and economic shifts in the United Kingdom, sandwiched between the turbulence of the 1970s and the changes that would come in the following decade. From there, your collection includes not 1 but 2 coins from the same year, 1993, and this small duplication tells its own quiet story about how coins circulate and accumulate over time. Both of these coins continue to bear the Maklouf portrait. Since that particular design remained in official use until 1997, meaning that a coin from 1988 and coins from 1993 would look remarkably similar in terms of the Queen's depicted image, differing only in their engraved dates. Finding 2 coins from the exact same year within a small personal collection is not unusual at all. In fact, it is quite common and expected. The Royal Mint, Britain's official coin-producing institution, strikes millions upon millions of coins every single year to keep up with the demands of everyday commerce, meaning that any given year's coinage exists in enormous quantities circulating simultaneously throughout the country. Coins and never encounter a repeated year than it would be to find duplicates. As you have here, 1993 itself was a fairly unremarkable year in terms of major currency changes, but it sat within a broader decade of transition for the United Kingdom, a period marked by economic recovery efforts, changing social attitudes, and the ongoing modernization of British institutions. At this point in her reign, the Queen was 67 years old, and although her official coin portrait had not changed since 1985, the world around her continued to shift in ways that would eventually be reflected in future redesigns of the currency she appeared on. The next chapter of your coin collection story takes us to the year 2001, and here we encounter yet another transformation in the Queen's coin portrait, the third distinct design of her reign up to that point. This new portrait was created by the sculptor Ian Rank-Broadley and was officially introduced in 1998, remaining in use for an impressively long stretch of time, all the way through 2015. What set the Rank-Broadley portrait apart from its two predecessors was a deliberate shift toward realism. Rather than presenting an idealized or softened version of the monarch, this design aimed to depict Queen Elizabeth II as she genuinely appeared at that stage of her life, with a more mature and naturalistic rendering of her features. This approach reflected a broader shift in how public figures, even royalty, were being portrayed in official imagery. During this era, moving away from purely ceremonial idealization and toward images that acknowledge the passage of time honestly. By 2001, the Queen was 75 years old, and Britain itself was entering a new century, having just crossed the symbolic threshold of the millennium the year before. The early 2000s were a period of considerable change globally, and your 2001 coin sits right at this fascinating intersection of a new century beginning and a monarch's image being reimagined once more for a new generation of citizens who would carry these coins in their pockets and purses. Finally, your collection concludes, at least in terms of the dates you have identified, with a coin from 2002, and this particular year carries special significance that elevates it beyond simply being 1 year after 2001. The year 2002 marked Queen Elizabeth II's Golden Jubilee, an enormous celebration commemorating 50 full years since she had ascended to the British throne back in February of 1952. Jubilee years in British royal history are treated with great ceremonial importance, often accompanied by public celebrations, commemorative events, and sometimes even specially designed coins or medals struck specifically to honor the milestone. While your particular 2002 coin carries the standard Rank-Broadley portrait rather than a unique Jubilee-specific design, its date alone ties it directly to this historic celebration, meaning that this coin was minted and entered circulation during one of the most celebrated years of the Queen's entire 70-year reign. At the time, she was 76 years old, and the Golden Jubilee served as a powerful reminder of just how long her reign had already lasted, how many changes British society had undergone during that time, and how much further her reign would still continue, ultimately stretching on for another 2 decades until her passing in 22. Taken together, these 6 coins, 1971, 1988, 1993, 1993, 2001, and 2002, form a remarkably coherent narrative arc spanning 31 years of British monetary and royal history. What makes this small collection particularly interesting is that it does not merely represent random dates scattered across time. It actually captures 3 distinct eras of the Queen's official coin portraiture. The earliest coin from 1971 reflects the very first post-decimalization design by Arnold Machin, created during a period of massive currency reform. The 1988 and 1993 coins reflect the second design era, crafted by Raphael Maklouf, characterized by a more polished and idealized artistic interpretation, and the 2001 and 2002 coins represent the third major redesign, created by Ian Rank-Broadley, defined by a shift toward realistic representation of the aging monarch. In essence, by simply laying these 6 coins out chronologically, you can visually trace the evolution of how Britain chose to represent its longest reigning monarch across three very different decades. The early 1970s, the late 1980s and early 1990s, and the dawn of the 21st century. Beyond the artistic and design elements, there is also something quietly moving about what these coins represent on a more human level. Each of these small metal discs passed through countless hands over the years, shopkeepers, commuters, children saving pocket money, perhaps even used to pay for a bus fare, a newspaper, or a loaf of bread at some point during their circulation. They witnessed in their own silent way the passage of ordinary daily life across 3 decades of British history, even as they carried the unchanging authority and symbolism of the monarchy stamped upon their surface. The fact that they eventually found their way into your possession, whether through inheritance, collection, or simple chance, means that you are now the custodian of these small fragments of time, each one a tiny time capsule connecting the Britain of 1971 to the Britain of 2002, and by extension, to the world we live. Your 6 coins tell a 31-year story of Queen Elizabeth II's reign from 1971 to 2002. The 1971 coin comes from the year Britain switched to decimal currency, carrying her first coin portrait by Arnold Machin, used until 1984. The 1988 and 1993 2 coins pieces show her second portrait, designed by Raphael Maklouf, used from 1985 to 1997, giving her a more elegant, idealized look. Having 2 coins from 1993 is normal, since millions were minted yearly. The 2001 and 2002 coins carry her third portrait by Ian Rank-Broadley, used from 1998 to 2015, showing her more realistically at her true age. The 2002 coin is special. It marks her golden jubilee, 50 years since becoming queen in 1952. Together, these coins capture 3 portrait eras and 3 decades of British history, quietly passing through everyday hands before landing in your collection today. Your small collection of 6 coins may look, at first glance, like nothing more than ordinary spare change, the sort of thing that collects at the bottom of a drawer or jingles forgotten in an old jacket pocket. But when you actually sit down and study the dates stamped into each one, a much richer story begins to unfold, one that stretches across 31 years of British history and follows the reign of a single monarch, Queen Elizabeth II, through 3 distinctly different chapters of her official coin portraiture. What you are holding is not simply metal and dates. It is a compact timeline of a nation's currency reform, its changing artistic tastes, and the slow, visible passage of time on the face of the woman who sat on the British throne longer than any monarch before her. The story opens in 1971, the earliest year represented in your collection, and it could hardly have opened at a more pivotal moment in British monetary history. That year, the United Kingdom carried out one of the most significant financial transformations of the 20th century, known widely as Decimal Day, which took place on the 15th of February 1971. Before this date, Britain still relied on an old and famously confusing currency system, inherited from centuries past, where 12 pence equaled 1 shilling and 20 shillings equaled 1 pound, a structure that had grown increasingly impractical for a modern economy engaging in international trade and everyday commerce. With Decimal Day, all of that changed, and Britain adopted the simpler system still used today, where 1 pound is divided cleanly into 100 pence. This shift required the Royal Mint to produce enormous quantities of new coinage, almost overnight, and your 1971 coin is a direct product of that historic reform. It bears the very first coin portrait of Queen Elizabeth II used after decimalization, a design crafted by the sculptor Arnold Machin, showing the Queen in profile wearing a delicate tiara. This particular portrait remained in official use from 1968 through 1984, and in the year your coin was struck, the Queen was 45 years old, already nearly 20 years into a reign that had begun in 1952, following the death of her father, King George VI. From there, the timeline jumps forward 17 years to 1988, a coin that represents the middle chapter of this story. By this point, the portrait gracing British coinage had changed for the second time, replaced by a new design created by the artist Raphael Maklouf. This version, in official circulation from 1985 through 1997, offered a noticeably different artistic interpretation of the monarch. Compared to the earlier machine design, Maklouf's rendering presented the queen with a more refined and somewhat idealized appearance, paying close attention to detail in her hair, her jewelry, and the ornate crown depicted in the design. Many coin historians have observed that this portrait leaned toward a more youthful and dignified presentation rather than a strictly literal depiction of her appearance at the time, reflecting a deliberate artistic choice common in royal portraiture. By 1988, the Queen was 62 years old, and Britain itself was in the midst of significant social and economic change. Sitting between the turbulence of the 1970s and the transformation still to come in the following decade, your collection then includes two coins sharing the same year, 1993, both still carrying the Maklouf portrait, since that design remained official until 1997. Finding two coins from an identical year within a small personal collection is entirely ordinary and, in fact, statistically expected. The Royal Mint strikes millions of coins annually to keep pace with the demands of daily commerce, meaning any given year's coinage exists in vast quantities circulating simultaneously across the country. It would be far more unusual to sort through a handful of old coins and never encounter a repeated date than to find duplicates exactly as you have here. 1993 itself was not marked by any dramatic currency change, but it belonged to a broader decade defined by economic recovery, evolving social attitudes, and the continued modernization of British public life. At this stage, the Queen was 67 years old, her official portrait unchanged since 1985, even as the wider world around her kept shifting in ways that would eventually prompt yet another redesign of her image on the nation's currency. The narrative then advances to 2001, introducing the third and final portrait represented in your collection. This new design was created by sculptor Ian Rank-Broadley and officially entered use in 1998, remaining in circulation for an unusually long stretch, all the way through 2015. What distinguished this portrait most clearly from its two predecessors was its commitment to realism. Rather than softening or idealizing the monarch's features, Rank-Broadley aimed to depict Queen Elizabeth II as she genuinely appeared at that point in her life, embracing a more mature and naturalistic likeness. This shift mirrored a broader trend in official portraiture during that era, moving away from purely ceremonial idealization toward imagery that acknowledged the honest passage of time. In 2001, the Queen was 75 years old, and Britain had just crossed the symbolic threshold into a new century, having recently marked the turn of the millennium. Your 2001 coin, then, sits at a fascinating intersection, a new century just beginning, and a monarch's image reimagined once again for a new generation of citizens who would
carry these coins through
their daily lives without a second thought. Finally, the story arrives at its concluding coin, dated 2002, a year carrying particular historical weight. This was the year of Queen Elizabeth II's Golden Jubilee, a grand nationwide celebration marking 50 full years since she ascended to the British throne in February 1952. Jubilee years hold deep ceremonial significance within British royal tradition, typically accompanied by public celebrations, commemorative events, and sometimes specially designed coinage struck specifically to honor the occasion. While your 2002 coin bears the standard Rank-Broadley portrait rather than a unique Jubilee-specific design, its date alone connects it directly to this historic milestone, meaning it entered circulation during one of the most celebrated years of the Queen's entire 70-year reign. At the time, she was 76 years old, and the Golden Jubilee served as a striking reminder of just how long her reign had already lasted, and how much further it would still continue, extending for another 2 decades until her passing in 2022. Taken as a whole, these 6 coins, dated 1971, 1988, 1993, 1993, 2001, and 2002, form a remarkably coherent 31-year narrative of British monetary and royal history. Rather than representing scattered, unrelated dates, this small collection actually captures 3 complete eras of the Queen's official coin portraiture in sequence, The earliest coin reflects the very first post-decimalization design by Arnold Machin, born out of a period of sweeping currency reform. The 1988 and 1993 coins reflect the second design era, shaped by Raphael Maklouf's more polished and idealized artistic vision. And the 2001 and 2002 coins represent the third major redesign, defined by Ian Rank-Broadley's commitment to realistic representation of the aging monarch. Simply laying these 6 coins out in chronological order allows you to visually trace how Britain chose to represent its longest reigning monarch across 3 markedly different decades: the early 1970s, the late 1980s into the early 1990s, and the very beginning of the 21st century. Beyond the artistic details and historical dates, there remains something quietly meaningful about what these coins have witnessed. Each of these small metal discs passed through countless hands over the decades, and shopkeepers counting change, commuters paying bus fares, children saving pocket money, ordinary daily transactions repeated millions of times over. They carried the unchanging authority and symbolism of the British monarchy on their surface, even as the world around them continued to shift and change with each passing year. That these particular coins eventually found their way into your possession, whether through inheritance, casual collection, or simple chance, means you now hold 6 small time capsules, each one quietly linking the Britain of 1971 to the Britain of 2002, and by extension, to the world as it exists today.